Hello and welcome back to our video series on the math department. In this video, I'm going to give you some general advice. In fact, much of what I'm going to say is good for any of your classes, not just your math classes. All right, so my first piece of advice is probably going to be the most controversial, and that is the responsibility for learning is on you. It's not on your professor. In fact, if you go to class and your professor says something that makes you say, wow, I totally get it now, that's a bonus. That's not what you should expect to happen all the time. I mean, don't get me wrong. As an instructor, I try my darndest to help facilitate student learning. But at the end of the day, the learning is almost all the time going to happen outside of class. And this might surprise you. A lot of students, particularly just coming from high school, have the experience that, all the learning is happening in the classroom. It's just not going to be the case anymore, really in any of your classes. The instructors will provide information, but when you actually need to learn something, particularly difficult concepts, that's mostly going to happen outside of class. And if you don't, that's on you, not on your professor. So given that you have this new responsibility for learning, what is that going to mean for you outside of class? Well, what we've found is that if you're taking a full load, so between 12 and 15 units, you're going to need roughly 25 to 35 hours per week outside of class. So it doesn't include class time itself. You need to be actively studying, got to turn the YouTube off, no checking Instagram. You just have to be working on your classes, 25 to 35 hours a week. That's going to be very difficult for a lot of people in general, but if you're working part-time or even a full-time job, that's going to be even harder. So we're going to have to talk later about managing your workload. Now, just because I said the responsibility for learning is on you doesn't mean you're in this alone. In fact, there's a lot of resources, as we've talked about in the other videos, that can help you outside of class. For example, in the calculus sequence, we have the supplemental instruction program. Your faculty member, while in class, I wouldn't expect them to teach you the material. If you go visit them in office hours, whether that's in person or virtually, I expect they can do a lot more to help facilitate your learning. Furthermore, if you go to office hours, you're likely to meet a lot of the fellow students in your class, and they are also going to be a fantastic resource. There's also the tutoring center. You are going to have support from us, and even though that 25 to 35 hours a week seems daunting, don't see it as something where you have to be alone. You're not alone. We in the math department are actively trying to build more and more learning communities to help facilitate that learning outside of class. The vast majority of my Cal State Fullerton students work outside of class. And whether it's just a few hours a week in order to pick up some extra money, or work a full-time job in order to support an entire family, it has some impact on their schooling. If you're working 20, 30, and 40 hours a week, how can you be expected to study 25 to 35 hours a week? It's just not feasible. Also, a lot of our students have family at home that need to be taken care of, whether they just need to be there or they have to take them to doctor's appointments or whatever. There's a lot on our students' plates. And usually by the time students figure out that they've taken too many classes, it's too late. It's much better to get help early in the semester than it is later in the semester. If you start going to your professor's office hours in the second week, I guarantee you're going to have a much better time than if you don't start showing up until week 12. So my advice to you is, don't be a hero. Be realistic. You know your situation better than anybody. Use that knowledge to determine how many classes you should be taking, and you're going to be much better off for it. Now, it's clear that there are some things in life you have to prioritize over others. For example, if you have a family member who's having a medical emergency, that's going to take priority over a class you're taking. But let's focus just on the academic side of things. Every semester, for example, you're going to have to build a schedule. And you're going to be taking some math courses and some not math courses, like general eds. Now, you might at some point say, you know what? I would love to take that math class, but it interferes with this general ed I already signed up for. Well, in that case, you've got it backward. Remember, you're here as a math major. That has to be the priority. You drop the general ed, you take the math class, and you'll fill in your schedule with other general eds. There's always another general ed to take. Oh, but I really wanted this general ed. Well, yeah, but you're a math major. Prioritize the math. Another thing I see students doing a lot is trying to fit their schedule onto 2 or 3 days a week. Now, for those who are working full-time or even 20 hours a week, that might just be a necessity. But assuming it's not, I recommend against consciously trying to build such a schedule. For starters, it likely will mean you don't get to take a math class that you really wanted to take, or a class with an instructor, and you really wanted to meet that instructor. Furthermore, a lot of faculty don't run their office hours on the same day as the classes, which means you might have a Monday-Wednesday schedule, huzzah, but if the faculty require you to come in on Tuesday and Thursday for office hours, well, there's a good chance you just won't come in. And let me again tell you how important faculty office hours are. I get a lot of students to my office hours, and I'll tell you what, it's not my weakest students. It's my strongest students. Now, they don't all start out my strongest students, but by repeatedly coming to office hours, they become my strongest students. Going to office hours is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. So make sure you set your schedule so that you can go to those office hours. That has to be a priority.